Hey guys, it is Momo Monday. You see Momo here. But it's a little different because Momo and I lost a friend over the weekend, right, Momo? Yeah. My friend Andre actually met Momo once when he was over here. We did karaoke at our house once, and Andre was one of the people that got to meet Momo because Andre and his partner Karsten ran karaoke at the charity events I did. And so one year we didn't actually do the event. We still had karaoke because we all kind of wanted to do it. But Andre was a stand up comic, predominantly an actor, a comedic performer. You may recognize him as the guy who did the disabled person harassment video that went viral a few years back, inspired by that video where a woman walked down the street and they recorded street harassment. Andre did one for disabilities, and I mean, Andre, we used to joke that if he was a lesbian woman, he'd be a walking tax credit because, not only was Andre a Portuguese disabled little person, ginger kid, he also had a rare biological condition called Morquio syndrome, which is an enzyme deficiency that, of course, led to the small stature and all that stuff. But I just wanted to do a little thing in sort of remembrance because, first of all, he was a good enough friend for me to give him my PlayStation 3 and all my old games when he was in the hospital for spinal surgery and going through a long recuperative period because I didn't want him to be bored, and I'd got my PS4 and I just didn't think about it. My husband and I drove it down, and there was even a little TV that we set up for him so he could play Batman because he loved Batman, and so thought it would be easier for him to, get by not being busy because Dre liked to be busy. But yeah, when it's me, and you guys know how I feel about my video games, when it's just sort of, nope, here we go. Gen 1, PS3, and a whole bunch of really cool games. Go nuts, buddy. That's a good friend. But also, I don't think he'd want us focusing on his disease, focusing on, and although, his disability and, physical challenges were a huge part of his comedy, the cool thing was that it was as a part of his life. And that's what's so odd about him doing that, the video that went viral, because that normally wasn't his thing. He'd talk about it and he'd make light of it. For him to go kind of serious like that, well, as serious as he got, that was quite rare. And normally his stand-up was absolutely hilarious because he was just so frank about this is his life and this is normal for him. And Andre was one of those people in the world where knowing him and being his friend couldn't help but make you better, because it really made you aware of the stuff people with disabilities go through, especially because he was, 3 foot nothing. It was always an issue whenever, especially in downtown Toronto, where stuff is, not wheelchair accessible. As a rule, there's all these workarounds for buildings being accessible because they're old buildings and it's too much money and all this stuff. It was always, we love Andre, let's have him here. How the hell do we get his scooter into this building up this narrow flight of stairs? And I mean, the scooter itself wasn't too bad. It would break down into a car, but the battery weighed a freaking ton. And it was always, and it shouldn't have been. It shouldn't have been this whole process. He should have been able to show up places and just be, one of the people there, just another person. And being a part of that, having to accommodate for the reality that this is a human being that we want to have at our events and various places, it shouldn't have been that much work. And it really made all of us, I think, aware in ways that just hearing about it wouldn't have done, that it isn't a question of, oh, aren't we good people caring about disabled people? It's no, that these are people and they have, just as many rights and privileges as everybody else, or they should. And I mean, I went to one of the memories that has hit me really hard recently, hearing about his passing, is Andre talked me into going to a very expensive Aerosmith concert because we had a shared love of Aerosmith. And the picture I could find of us singing karaoke, we're actually singing "Don't Look Back in Anger," but we had a shared love of Aerosmith, and he said to me, "Hey, Aerosmith's coming to town. You want to go?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "Of course." Should have asked how much are the tickets, because the tickets were $110 a pop, because the accessible seating was, of course, in a place that's a more expensive ticket. And so you don't have the option of going to the nosebleed section. And even those weren't terribly cheap. But I was like, oh, 110 bucks? Really? Like, I could buy every single Aerosmith album for that. And I remember he said to me, you'll regret not going because these guys are getting older, and he really wanted to see them live. I agree. I enjoy live music when a band is actually good live. But he says, these guys are getting older, and you don't know. One of them could die at any moment, and then you're not going to be able to see them. And I don't think I actually agreed. I think he actually bought the tickets and kind of tricked me into going. But that was kind of Andre. When he wanted something, nothing was going to stop him from doing it. And we went and we had a really good time, and he was, absolutely right. Now I have this memory of someone who convinced me to go to this concert, somewhat through deception for my own good, but also, Momo doesn't like deception for our own good, but also because of the idea that people aren't around forever. And you have to appreciate them while they're on this earth. And that's, super poignant now. Because the last time I saw Andre do his stand-up was right before he went into the hospital to have very major spine surgery. And there was an urgency, an immediacy to this performance that I hadn't seen in him before this. I remember him saying that he really wanted people to come see his show because he was going to the hospital, major surgery, knew it was going to be major recuperation. And I don't remember the exact wording he used, but it was either I could die or I may go in and not come back out. Like, it could have been his last stand-up show ever. And that wasn't Andre. Andre didn't talk that way. And so for him to say this, it's like, okay, we must go to this show. I'd known his closer in his routine was based on an experience he had with a French Canadian woman at these New Year's Eve party we used to run. The last time I saw Andre that night was he was standing up on one foot, leaning over the handlebars of his scooter, posed like a cherub on a fountain. You know, the ones where the water comes out of their mouth? Well, instead of water coming out of his mouth, this French-Canadian girl was pouring sautelage, which is a combination of, I believe, it's either whiskey and maple syrup or brandy and maple syrup, but she was pouring it into his mouth right from the bottle. That's when I checked out for the evening. Apparently it was a good night after that, and her roommate, the guy she was sharing a room with, walked in on them the next morning, and it was kind of the talk of the event. Oh my God, did you hear what happened? This event was the ending of his stand-up act. And I saw the people in front of us who were right into his act, thought he was hilarious, but you could see them becoming increasingly incredulous because comedians exaggerate a lot for effect. And so you saw them kind of, is did this actually happen this way? I'm not sure. It's funny, but so after the show I said, by the way, all that's 100% true. I mean, he didn't exaggerate. He didn't have to. He had this ability to see the humor in a situation without adding to it. And that is a really singular talent for any comedian, to not have to make stuff up, to just take stuff from your life and either piece it together in a funny way or find a funny angle to come at it. But that really was Andre's gift. And obviously, that came, he got good at that because he was coping with stuff that was not easy, you know. Nobody knew how much pain he was really in, I think. He didn't complain about it. He complained about other stuff. Like, he complained about the annoyances of life. You know, real Wheel-Trans screwing up. That's the disabled bus feature. Or, you know, not being able to use accessible washrooms. And I mean, we had an event at a hotel, and they say wheelchair accessible washrooms and wheelchair accessible rooms. But what we discovered through Andre is they're not all created equal. And so the door on this washroom, instead of having a button, because it was a single stall, and a lot of the, you know, higher end accessible bathrooms have a button you can just push and the door opens. Well, this one didn't. It had the proper door clearance and it had the bars on the walls, but even those, for someone like Andre, he might not be able to reach the sink. He might not be able to reach the toilet paper dispenser. And in this case, he couldn't reach the door to get out. And he tried to open it with his cane. The cane broke, and he was apparently in there for about 45 minutes before one of the other organizers, who's also French-Canadian, remembered he was in there. And he remembered he was in there because we were talking about, I forget, we were talking about the war in Afghanistan and something like that. And all of a sudden, Seb jumps up and goes, "Afghanistan, Andre," and he bolts out of the room. And we were like, how'd they connect that? And it was, Andre had been telling us about this girl from Kazakhstan he'd been seeing while she was in town, but it all went bad because it turned out she had a boyfriend and he was coming over. Oops. But Kazakhstan sounded enough like Afghanistan to remind Seb that Andre had disappeared into the bathroom 45 minutes ago. So, I mean, being trapped in a bathroom for 45 minutes is not fun, but it ended up being funny stories. And the thing about funny stories is they can only be funny stories in retrospect if you can find them funny. And it takes a unique kind of person to find a life of stories like that funny. Just because people are good at brushing things off, is not letting things get to them long term, it doesn't mean it doesn't bother them. And it doesn't mean it is something you should do. And it's very telling, the amount of the outpouring of, it's hard to say because it's not so much grief as it is kind of gratitude for having known him. It is definitely more people sharing funny stories and remembering the experience of knowing Andre Arruda instead of just being, you know, inconsolably sad. And I think that's a mark of a life well lived. I mean, hey, maybe this is just me trying to make the best out of something, but I think that if that's how your life is defined, you've done a pretty good job. And I think that's why I wanted to make this video and once again scrap the content I'd pre-recorded diligently on Friday. I think that that's why I sort of wanted to introduce people who didn't know him to his work and to his life. And the nice thing about YouTube, the nice thing about us having so much of ourselves on the internet now is that people can go and still see his stuff and still hear his jokes and still see the videos he made. And so he's going to continue to touch lives in his own way. And I think that anybody who lives and the people who knew them feel like they're better because they knew them, like I said, that's a life well lived. Unlike so many comics, he still had the ability to enjoy life. He laughed a lot. He smiled a lot. He was the world's proudest uncle. I didn't feel like I should just let this go by. In part because, you know, he was my friend, but also because he was a funny guy and he was a comic, and talent, especially talent in comedy, should be appreciated and should be celebrated.